Welcome back to Trending in Education and happy Valentine's Day. It's an extra edition of Trending in Education, and we have a very special guest along with myself and Mike Palmer. That is KS Wiswell, the author of Full Frontal Nerdity, Lessons in Loving and Living with Your Brain, and a fellow Kaplan employee. KS, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello. Thank you. Excited to be here.
And we have a lot to discuss here. The book itself, the process of the book coming around. Can you, for our audience, what brought you to write this book? Where'd your life lead you from early childhood all the way through to college to your career now in about, let's say, 7 seconds or less? Go.
The whole life story. Got it. In my other job, I am a writer in Los Angeles, a screenwriter. But I came to that through sketch comedy and improv. So when that lent itself to doing a blog on the side in addition to my screenwriting. And that blog, which was started as a personal project, became unexpectedly popular. And again, while I had lots of downtime, I was like, what can I keep doing? So I decided to try and turn it into a book. And then that itself was like a 3 or 4 year process.
That's awesome. And Mike Palmer here. So KS, by the way, KS those are nice initials. So I like that because what do they actually stand for? You could go in a myriad different directions. So I definitely appreciate it.
I do lie about what the S stands for because I was born late. If I had been born on time, I would have been named what my father, an English teacher, wanted to name me, which is Scout.
Interesting. I thought the S stood for savings, but maybe that's just because I spent a lot of time in test prep. But yeah, so the book, and as I mentioned when we were warming up, is a really wonderful read. You're a blogger, and you've been blogging, I guess, for quite some time. And then I'm really curious about the interplay between improv, writing a blog, and now you're doing this podcast. I don't know if you've done other podcasts.
This is the first.
Oh, for real? Oh my God. I think there's more podcasting in your future. But can you kind of compare and contrast what it's like to do improv versus writing a blog versus appearing on a really groundbreaking educational podcast like the one you're appearing on right now?
Well, the biggest difference with blogging is that I have no one to disappoint but myself, as far as I can tell, where there are other people involved in the other two.
Right.
I started doing improv. Well, it was how I was introduced to just performing and the stage when I was a kid. So I started doing improv when I was 8 or 9 through the children's theater program in my community, because that's how we wrote our shows. Mm-hmm. But I kept doing it all through high school, and I took a break in college. But then when I decided I wanted to, after college, pursue something in the arts, in theater or film, I came out to LA and I didn't know anybody. And so I decided to just go to the Second City, because the Second City is, the Harvard of improv schools. And also I knew I would meet people that way because I didn't know anyone in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. But I kept doing it for years, even after I graduated through the conservatory, because it is the scariest thing in the world to me. Mm-hmm. Perfectionist and a writer, so I like control. Mm-hmm. To have to get on stage with no plan and trust other people is terrifying.
Right.
But if you do, so much in this world scares me anyway, that I try and do something that scares me. I feel like if I can do the scariest thing I can think of once a week,
right,
then whatever, nothing else is all that scary.
Right,
and it does really help. It helped me relax, control. And blogging was a little bit different, because blogging, I started doing it just for myself, as a personal exercise. I wanted to challenge myself. So I guess it's in the same vein. Mm-hmm. Do something that challenges you. And I was not convinced I would be able to keep up a blog, because at that point, I'd moved on from sketch comedy to screenwriting. And there's a 600 to 1,000 word blog piece once a week versus a screenplay that takes 6 months to a year to finish. Sure. Is a very different discipline. So I wanted to see if I could do it.
Right. No, it's really interesting. And also, if you're used to being improvisational and not overly prepped, welcome to podcasting, because that's very much in our wheelhouse. But it is really interesting when you then analogize that to teaching and learning, being open to what emerges in the moment. I've always thought of that as a really critical component of good teaching. So, you've been a Kaplan teacher for a little bit of time now too, right? So like, can you compare how long?
A decade.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
My God. That's plenty of hours of experience. How are you able to sort of incorporate the learnings from improv and screenwriting and sort of those kinds of experiences into being a really effective of teacher? Because I do think there are probably some interesting parallels to being present in the moment, being ready to kind of react to the offers that are given to you. Any initial impressions on what's transferable there?
Oh yeah, I do a lot of teacher mentoring for Kaplan in my area, and I've had other people, from the company say, what do you think we can do, to improve our teacher training? And I always say, to me, the best training I ever had was improv. I think when I talk to new teachers, I say the two biggest things going into a class to being successful is the one, like, have a set plan that backwards and forwards, like exactly why you're doing this problem and where it's going. You have the overall structure set, but beyond that, don't have a plan. You have to be ready to roll with it because you don't know what questions the students are going to ask. And even now, a decade in, I have students who will occasionally have a reading of an answer choice that I've never heard before. And you can't have rote explanations for why, like, you have to know why that answer choice is wrong, but you also have to be able to hear what they're saying and understand what they're saying and deal with that question in the moment. And also in addition, in terms of the time management, which is another major factor of teaching, when you do get derailed by an interesting debate that comes up in class, time-wise, you have to be able to find a quick way to get yourself back on track.
Right.
So flexibility, and the ability to roll with it are hugely important. And then on a completely side note, and this is not something you can really learn how to do, but being a comedian, being funny is incredibly useful in class.
Right.
It helps if you can it helps draw them in. And I hear from my students, I probably hear more than anything else, they're surprised at how entertained they were through a 4-hour class.
Right. And I definitely think that's sort of critical to, like, one thing we emailed you a little bit about this heading into the show, but like sort of the idea of edutainment, like there's a related concept called like stealth learning where like you could sneak up on people and then afterwards they're like, oh, wow, I just learned something, but I was actually having a pretty engaging, fun experience. And then at the end of the day, I came away learning more. I was pretty struck by that in full Frontal Nerdity, and full disclosure, I'm still trying to power through the remainder of it, but like and it's a collection of essays talking about
bite sizes for a reason, so that you can snack now and then.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that because also like life is, it's hard to get dedicated focus for long periods of time. So the idea that you can kind of knock out these essays like on the train or, in the sort of intervening moments in life, I thought was great. But I was really struck by the way you were able to bring surprising examples to explain more esoteric, arguably nerdy, and I like that you're trying to reclaim like nerd power, in a good way. You're among friends here.
Smart and sexy, that's my thing.
yeah. Well, I mean, even like we can get into it a little bit, but also like the idea of like being a woman who's sort of asserting your power through your intelligence and your ability to write. I actually I did find the book to be pretty compelling in that context, but I also thought it was really interesting to think about, do people learn concepts like Drake's equation or like Bayesian logic or probability? Do people learn that better when the explanations are more about their love life the examples are more personally relevant.
Yeah.
I've always found that to be the case. Again, I began as a Kaplan teacher myself. Like I found that when you can turn it into something personal, humorous, narrative oriented, there's a level of earning the learner's attention that frequently is more difficult if you leave it all, I'm going to teach you these abstract concepts, and I'm never really going to talk about the relevance to you in your everyday life.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I definitely it seemed like a recurring theme, and it almost seems like, if there was a way to encapsulate what Full Frontal Nerdity is about, it's sort of like taking these sort of abstract concepts that you want to learn about and then turn them into a very personal narrative based on your own experiences. So can you just maybe expand a little bit on that?
Well, I think that's definitely a better way for people to learn. People seem to learn and remember things better that way. I do myself personally.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that if you asked me at any point in my life what I wanted to do, I would have basically just said, I want to change the world and make it better.
Mm-hmm.
When I was graduating from college, I basically had a choice. I was thinking of going to law school,
mm-hmm.
or I was thinking about going into movies, writing movies. And
right.
I picked that route in part because I feel like you can make just as much of an impact, if not more of an impact, by getting across, I admire advocates in the world, and I think that they, of course, are doing heroes work. I'm not sure that I could necessarily hang in their ranks, but I do feel like what I can do is I can change your mind by telling you an interesting story that makes you think about things.
Right.
Relating it to your life in a way that both makes you laugh, but also makes you suddenly think, oh, is that the same thing? I mean, I love satire. I love Douglas Adams and Terry Pratchett, and I grew up reading those guys because they were making they were making a political point or
mm-hmm.
points about our society through humorous science fiction and fantasy.
Right.
So, and I've always been a sciencey, nerdy person. I went to college to be an applied math major.
Right.
But I ended up being a writer. So it's also kind of my thing to try and combine unlike things. My brain just works that way. And I find that analogies have always been my strength.
Right.
So I took that opportunity. It took probably about 30 years for me to realize that was a little bit different, that not everybody's mind suddenly thinks about dating when they're listening to stories about Bayesian reasoning or when they're learning about Bayesian reasoning and statistics.
Yes.
Or about when they're thinking about astrophysics. So I thought, oh, well, people find this interesting. Maybe I should put this out there.
Yeah.
Me, it's totally normal, but I realized that I kind of exist at a crossroads between two very different worlds, which is the world of my nerdy physics, applied math, Harvard self, and then my Second City improv comedy world self.
Yeah, and that's something that we love to navigate that those sort of points of intersection on the show too, because I do think I talk a lot about Steve Jobs and the sort of the intersection between a creative versus somebody who can kind of build technical things, and he kind of blew up that false dichotomy, and it seems like, at least what I got in the book, is that you're almost trying to do that too, where folks who might think these concepts are just, we've talked about relevance a lot on the show. When you're designing curricula, you should actually make sure that it's relevant to your learners, because if they don't understand the relevance of what they're learning, they're just going to check out.
Yeah, they always are asking, why do I need to know this? I mean, the key to getting through your class is at every page say, this is why this matters.
Right.
Why we did this.
Exactly. And I got that. I mean, and the nice thing about the read, I think, is that it gives me stuff that I could just casually talk to my friends about. Now I feel a little more comfortable, although not 100% comfortable, talking about Drake's equation or talking about Bayesian thinking because of your examples. And that's because previously, whenever I heard somebody talk about Drake's equation, I might start to check out, because I'm like, all right, this is getting a little bit of beyond my depth. But you as a rom-com centered thinker, because I definitely got a lot of that out of what's in the book.
Oh yeah.
You're turning it into very personal everyone has had awkward dating experiences. I appreciate your vulnerability and comfort, like being sort of forward about that in your own life.
I've been dumped that I describe in this book. Yes.
Oh my God. But I was really kind of like, I don't know, like impressed in some ways about the way in which that's sort of surprising, and how surprise earns the learner's attention. That's something we do talk a lot about, where like, delivering the same lesson plan the way everyone has ever taught a concept before doesn't really make an impact. I mean, maybe it will, but like there's a level to which this is again getting at the intersection between art and science around teaching. There's probably a certain level of, you need your learning objectives. You need to make sure your audience comes away learning whichever key ideas they need to learn. But a lot of that's then delivered in an artful way. And I got that sort of artistry in the book, but I also, I'd like to understand a little more, like, how do you think about that as a teacher, and how much artistry is involved, and how much sort of being in the moment and spontaneous is involved in really being excellent at teaching. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I love being surprised too. I love surprising myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm always searching for a better way, especially if, I had a class that I was just like, oh, they just weren't getting it this time. And what is wrong? Is there a different way? Did I teach it differently? Did I say something in a different way that didn't work? So I'm always searching for a better analogy. I mean, I just, in fact, this last class I taught, again, after doing this for more than 9 years, because my anniversary is not till May 1st, I came up with an analogy for just road mapping passages. And I must have been just in a weird mood or something. And I was like, well, we're talking about road maps. And I made a joke about having AAA. And then I was like, well, can I expand this into what are the three, like, can I talk about the 3 key things that you have to pay attention to when you're mapping a passage? And I was like, yeah, you're looking for like, you're looking for arguments, you're looking for the author, and you're looking for, arguments, the author's emphasis, and then attitude. Anything that expresses an attitude. And my class, it was amazing. Like their faces this is also why I like being an on-site teacher. Their faces lit up.
Yep.
It was like this moment of like light bulbs were almost literally above their heads. I could almost see them, and then I loved it, and they suddenly got it. I was like, that worked out way better than I was expecting it to. And I love when I have those moments, because like there's a piece in the book where I talk about the properties of metal, and I equate them to different kinds of friendships.
Sure. I was very,
and that was completely by accident. I was just looking for an idea for that week, and I had the Girl Scout song, Make New Friends, Make Me Feel One is Silver and the Other's Gold, stuck in my head for who knows what reason. And then I thought, well, that's interesting. Like, what are the other metals, and what other kind of friendships are there? And then I just went online and I did like a day's worth of research on the different properties of metals and stuff. And it was amazing to me how well things started to line up. And I love those moments. It's, mathematicians have those moments, and so do performers, especially improvisers. Those moments on stage when you're like, oh, magic is happening right now. We stumbled into something that's actually true.
Yeah. It's almost like you're tapping into something transcendent, like it was in you in some capacity, but like you're sort of channeling something that's outside of you.
Yeah, a lightning bolt of inspiration
hit
you, and you just happen to be receptive to it at that moment.
Yes. And by the way, when I did get to the periodic elements, and I was very happy that you talked about tungsten, which happens to be my favorite element. Although I feel like, I feel like in the next round, you may need to give tungsten a little more love, because we didn't talk about tungsten as the filament. Like tungsten is what gives us the incandescent glow that we love. But yeah, like, and that was where, like, honestly, as a reader of your book, it almost felt like there were a lot of offers to me where like my thinking then was spurred to kind of go into new directions too. And I do feel like finding good analogies, this gets back to like the concept of learning transfer too, where like if you can understand how this analogy makes sense in this context, you can then frequently, what insight is frequently is transferring that then to another context, and then finding the examples and the narratives that resonate broadly. This gets back to romantic comedy, but like those kinds of things are part of the collective unconscious. I try to say zeitgeist almost every show, so I just got a chance to ding. But there are places where, like, and this maybe ties a little bit to the edutainment and the broader like relevance of the content. But if you can remind people that this is sort of like the nerd power thing too. If you could say, like, this isn't this abstract thing that isn't relevant to you. This could actually help you think differently about your romantic life, about your career prospects, about just sort of the self-improvement side of things. Can you talk a little bit about that? How, like,
definitely, I love the idea. I want this to get people to go off and think on their own. Writing the blog was a good exercise for me, because my instinct too is like, I could sit down and talk about most of these subjects. Like, each of them I could have written 5 times longer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the blog, when it was actually a blog, it was hard. I learned early on that the pieces that got a lot of resonance were the ones that were under 1,000 words, which for me was challenging in many cases. So I could do the full explanation, especially there's that lawyerly instinct in me. I'm an LSAT teacher.
Sure.
That lawyerly instinct in me to be like, let's cover all the bases and look at it from every angle and like talk, and so it was, it's nice though that I had to keep it short, and I like the idea of it instead being something that I don't have to fill in the whole conversation, and I shouldn't fill in the whole conversation. I should give you the parameters, and then hopefully having changed your brain a little bit, you'll be like, oh, I want to learn more about metals and think, look, or I have a rebuttal. Like, I want to tell you, this is what I know about tungsten and love about tungsten, and this is how we can further relate it. And isn't that exciting?
Right. Right.
I love the idea of convincing someone to want to do more themselves, to take it from me and run with the ball, and not just read it and go, oh, that's cool, and then be done with it.
Yeah, and I do wonder about that too, just around the book, as opposed to improv, is more unidirectional. I guess the blog, I imagine a blog, you're getting input from your readers and your, folks are responding.
I did get some, although originally I started the blog, again, as a private exercise, just I was waiting. There's a piece in the book about how I had a screenplay that was in limbo for years. So it was kind of like almost happening, but not. And so I had downtime and I didn't want to start a big project. So I just was like, let me do something that will keep my writing sharp. Right. But I wanted to get back some of my improv brain.
Sure.
My sketch brain. So I basically told my friends and family about it, but that was it. And then I wrote one piece. It's the piece in there. I think it's the second or third essay about, will you be my eggplant?
Yes.
The lack of words in the English language for the various stages of dating.
Right.
And that piece was literally written in the back of my parents' car. I was visiting them in March. I was visiting them in Florida, and I was trying to keep my goal of writing one piece a week, but I was traveling. So we were driving. I'd flown to Florida. We'd stayed in a motel, and then we were driving an hour and a half in the morning. We were driving to their house because I'd flown in late at night. And I wrote it in the back of their car. So it was like, it kind of was like, what can I do? And I just wrote it, and it resonated so much with people. And then I started suddenly I had like 1,000, then 2,000 followers. And I thought, oh, now strangers. And then it does become a little different, because then people that's when I really realized the power of it, because people did start responding and saying, oh, I've always thought about this. And have you thought about that? And that was what made me realize, oh, this is a conversation and it's exciting, and I like it better that way.
Yeah. And it's got to be interesting to then shift to becoming like an author of a printed book. And I did, I'm gonna riffle. I like the word riffle. And for our listeners, it's not quite an ASMR show, but I was able to just riffle through your book, which I was holding in front of me. But like that is, it's got to be interesting to then think about how that might relate to improv and events too. Like, are there ways to kind of almost be more multimedia, I guess, in terms of how you think about your content delivery, like your content distribution. So like, I imagine this is the type of thing that a lot of podcasts, for example, are crossing over into the live event space. It's something we've sort of explored and had some success with. But I imagine as somebody who's been an improv performer, and then you've been a blogger and a screenwriter, and you've taught, and teaching in essence is a live event.
Yeah, I refer to it as my 4-hour one-woman improv show.
Exactly. Exactly. But are there plans to do things like that with the book now that you've written it? Is it a way to kind of kick off events and ways to kind of like begin a conversation or improvise off of this as sort of a foundation? Or how do you think about these different modes? Because it's pretty interesting how you've been firing on multiple fronts here.
Yeah, I love exploring new medium. I hadn't really thought about it, honestly, although one of my friends read this book and she actually said, this should be a podcast. You could do every week, or each episode would just be, you get an expert in whatever the subject area was, and then you relate it to whatever you're relating it to in the real world. And you could go on forever. And I was like, yeah. And also I feel like, honestly, my first thought was that might be easier because I can talk for an hour. I can, just talk off the cuff for an hour, whereas having to write down and edit and
right.
That's a lot of work. But I love the challenge of moving things from one medium to another. I started out, like I said, going from improv to sketch comedy is really hard, trying to, because something that's funny in the moment being made up is not funny when it's scripted on the page. Right. So you have to add an element of purpose. There has to be an arc to the scene suddenly in sketch comedy that there doesn't have to be an improv. The audience is more forgiving. Right. And then I started moving that into screenplays. That's a completely different beast. I just spent 2 years adapting one of my screenplays into a stage musical. Which I thought would be super easy, and was so hard I cried several times over the course of the process. Yeah. But it's really exhilarating. And then transferring the blog to a book was also, I suddenly started to realize I needed things like a through line. I had to pick and choose which pieces. There are a lot of pieces that I love that never made it into the book because they really were just a personal story. Right. And if the book is about taking academic subjects and connecting them to real life, then it just didn't fit, even though it was an essay that I love. So it's fun, the challenges that come up with every new medium. And I believe that, writing and storytelling is a skill. It's the fundamental skill to all of those things. Yep. But you have to respect the parameters of each new genre, in the same way that I think teaching is storytelling. Teaching is also storytelling, but you have to respect what is required in the medium of teaching. There is a purpose. You have to get certain amount of material across. You have to focus on the student instead of on you. Like, you have to be willing to sacrifice certain things and put different things at the forefront. And I'll just end that with a fun little story about one of the many people who are mentioned in one of these essays, who's probably one of the worst people I've dated. This is what initiated my don't date writers rule. But
or people who own birds, right? That was the other one, right? Like people who have birds as pets.
Oh yeah, bird people. Which that was again just a completely random idea I had, and then I ran with it. But no, I was dating somebody who, he was a novelist who wrote short stories, but he was working on his novel all the time. He was a short story writer, and that's what he did. He just wrote short stories, and he's hilarious. He's a great writer. I'm still a fan, even though not so much of him as a person. And when we were breaking up, he actually said to me he didn't believe I was a writer, because he said, well, you don't even know what you write screenplays, and then you're working on a TV pilot, and you're writing a play, and you have this blog, and I was so taken aback, because I was just like, what makes you think that because I explore other structures for my art that I'm not an artist? Right. It was just so mind-bogglingly narrow. Right. An idea.
Yeah, who needs that guy? You're better off not who needs that guy, even if he's a good writer.
Yeah.
And
who
and
also has a book now.
oh, for real? Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I just gotta say, it's a wonderful read. I would really encourage our listeners to dig in and explore it. We'd love to have you maybe come back on the show more too, because I think you're bringing a nice energy as a creator and as the like nerd power and feminist energy, which is really throughout the book, and in a way that's also funny because it's kind of disarming. And like, I think you wind up wearing so many hats that we don't really know even how to peg you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's
marketing the book has been a nightmare because of that.
well, but to your point, like I actually think maybe we need to kind of expand our thinking as a society, not to get lofty about all this, but like
I agree.
we tend to want to almost oversimplify and like just get an easy hook or easy peg for people. And I think lots of times like folks who have a lot to say and a lot of interesting perspectives are harder to kind of fit into a pre-existing mold. I mean, that's really why we want to continue to explore new ideas and new concepts. I'd love to come back more to some of the more esoteric ideas that, because the examples are pretty hilarious, and the range of topics are that you wind up educating your readers again in that sort of sneaky way that I like. Is really something worth pursuing, both in terms of this book and our readers, our listeners reading this book. I think it'd be great, but also in terms of finding other formats for you to kind of like continue to explore that idea and that format.
I'd love to come back. We could do an entire. I feel like there's almost a mini book within this book about quantum theory and stress management.
That's a wonderful tease. I don't even know where we would go with that, but that's what makes it wonderful.
I take a lot of, in the life half, I take a lot of inspiration personally in the way that I think about the bigger picture through my readings and my peripheral understanding of quantum theory.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to dig in more there. And even like the fact that you're tying self-improvement to learning, which is kind of like a no-brainer, but that's something we have actually talked about on this show before, where like frequently the self-improvement movement and how we think about learning and education are sort of thought of as separate.
Well, we have IQ and we have EQ, and I like the idea of using your IQ to inform your EQ, and also just having a healthier EQ, just awareness of your own feelings and emotions. I will just say the subtitle of the book, Lessons in Loving and Living with Your Brain, is phrased that way because I want it to be able to be parsed two ways. It's about loving and living using your brain, so being smarter about the way that we think about the world, but also learning to love and live with your brain, because our brains mess us up in so many ways, especially if you are an overthinker and a super intellectual person like I've been most of my life. I've struggled with the neuroses that come from just being a really logical, academic oriented,
Totally.
that kind of person. And so it's been a huge process for me to learn how to live with that and accept that my brain is a gift. It's not just the thing that has scared off men for most of my life, but
but it's both a gift and then something to learn to adjust to, you know what I mean? Like it's not
help me if I let it, as long as I don't let it take over.
Exactly. So yeah, this is a wonderful conversation. Awesome having you with us. Dan, any closing remarks, any ways to kind of punctuate this run-on sentence?
Well, maybe a semicolon of sorts, but we have KS Wiswell with us. It's Full Frontal Nerdity. You can find the book on Amazon. Where can they find you, though? Where can they find your ongoing writing? I know you do have a nerd night in Los Angeles that you will be speaking at. Where can folks who listen to this podcast find you in future endeavors?
Well, they can find me on Twitter at @FrontalNerd. And the blog is kind of dormant right now because of the book, although I have been thinking about picking it up. I will definitely spread the word if I start writing regularly again. The blog died when I started writing for Huffington Post for a while, and then that ended. So now I'm back to writing long-term things, screenplays and such. But Twitter, I'm on Twitter every day, even though I shouldn't be. And yes, I'm performing at LA, Nerd Night LA, which is la.nerdnight.com if you want to check it out. There are nerd nights in cities all over the country, though, and I highly recommend it because it's super fun.
Fantastic. And I would say no one really should be on Twitter ever, but we all get drawn back to it each and every day. With that said, you can find us on Twitter at Trending in Ed, on Facebook as well, trendingineducation.com. As Mike said, we'll have KS back in the future. Great conversation and maybe a podcast of your own waiting to be had, KS. We look forward to hearing that as well. Find us again, trendingineducation.com. Till next time, thanks so much for listening to Trending in Education.